speech Glenbrooks around 6F. Good? Got it? All right. Is everybody ready? I affirm the standards minimizing structural barriers that define as leaving the material conditions that commit structural bonds and models to one is set to make sure to deal with real world consequences. Ideal theories ignore the concrete nature of the world legitimized suppression. Curry 14 despite the pronounced debate is pointing to real world consequences. Any discussion that are fixed to a paradigm which sees the education of material disparities and social realities as one concrete ideal over another. Ethics deals by definition with normative issues. Concept of chasm between what emerges as the actual problem in the world and how we frame such problems theoretically is the most obvious call for anti-ethical paradigms. It's just as the actual as basis of what can be considered normatively for any empirical observation or phenomenon is a necessary representation. One has to abstract this gap. There into the real discussion about the concrete nature of oppression or attempts to situate social disparities cannot be appealed to ontologization of social phenomena. We cannot suggest the various complexities of social problems are realizable by any one set of theories within ideological free are no shared notions of Afro-pessimism, femme, or the like. This awareness does not command us to do X, but rather X ideas which either complement the material conditions of the neglects that need to do X, and work to remedy or cast awareness among our ideological tendencies in politics. And individual empowerment is key to breaking the culture of science. This is a sequencing question. Pina 9. Marginalization expels whole categories of people from use of participation in social life. Some people have powers, whether have not. They powerless do not participate because they feel that they can't, or they won't mean anything. Powerless is a strong form of oppression because it allows people to oppress themselves and others. This creates a culture of silence. People become so powerless that they're not even talk about their oppression. They have no voice and no will. They are taught that their inferiority is normal. They are not even have a voice. Education may be withheld to prevent them from gaining knowledge. They oppress or dehumanize men taught to believe in negative perceptions. In fact, the only way to fight the silence is through using the voice and gaining perspective. And part one is disposability. Instead of focusing on fixing poverty, discrimination, modern politics focuses on how we can keep disposable bubbles invisible and out of sight and out of mind. Juro 7. Biopolitics colonial shape has produced a new form of biopolitics marked by the cleansed visual and social landscape in which the poor and criminalized populations all share common fate of disappearing from the public view. Rendered invisible, the communities are far removed and turned by bulging prisons, filled and far remote communities. They have become the waste products of modernity. These living dead reflect a government agenda based on attacking the poor rather than protecting poverty beneath the liberal rooms. Corporate ethic, the idea of democracy is disappearing with the space of democracy is produced nurtured values, identities, and social relations are slowly being overtaken by market-based notions of freedom or insist the language of public good. The presence of racialized poor needs, their needs and vulnerabilities is now visible, become unbearable, and criminalization is rampant. Practically anyone can be labeled a criminal. This gives prosecutors coercive power over marginalized groups. Randall 13. We recounted a popular game at the U.S. Attorney's Office in New York. And you name a famous person, decide how she could be prosecuted. The crimes are usually broad yet obscure. They populate the U.S. code like a minefield. Crimes are false statements. If prosecutors are not motivated by politics, the risk of improper prosecution would not be severe. However, such motivations do encourage prosecutors to pursue certain individuals. The proliferation of criminal statutes has reached a point where every citizen is potentially at the risk of prosecution. Since everyone is criminal, prosecutors look hard enough, they are guaranteed to find something precise. Overcharging of plea bargains, the decision to prosecute is probably the single most important, even the chain of criminal procedures. And this is not just speculation. Ridiculous prosecution laws are used to criminalize queer individuals and activists. Criminalization is retaliation against liberation. Titan 15. Black transgender activist Monica Jones was arrested for manifestation of prostitution, even though she was not engaged. The code allows for an arrest for an activity many activists taking part regular partly, such as engaging multiple people in conversation, waving at cars, or organ carrying. Whether an individual is a police officer, built into law is the assumption that such behaviors are signs that someone intends to engage in prostitution, something we all know is ridiculous. And the drug war is the epitome of mass incarceration. This modern mode of racist control that President Expansion maintains racial hierarchies and prevent black self-determination. Alexander 6. New form of social control does exist. Racial segregation, political disenfranchisement, and social stigmatization have long opposed to control of people of color. African American men comprise half the prison population. 1 out of 3 African American men is imprisoned. The war on drugs is the most sweeping and damaging manifestation. Mass incarceration provides white elites and social benefits. Racial hierarchy remains intact. Felon disenfranchisement law tilted skill in favor of the white electoral. 1 in 5 black men have permanently disenfranchised. 2000 presidential election illustrated the dramatic effects. Mass incarceration results in fewer legislative seats for communities of color. No one is representing people of color behind bars. The genius of new systems that successfully blames the victim. The system built to last. And part 2 is liberation from within jury notification of the aftermath that we will not wait for justice that disposable bodies are fed to the prison industrial complex. The lives we directly save are impact enough. We should not be complicit within the system. Collins 09. What is the current course of percentage of black men in a jail represent a disparate treatment? Prisons breaking down from recidivism, rape, and AIDS. Why do they have to be patients? MLK provides an excellent response. For years, I've heard the word wait. This wait has almost become never. It has been tranquilizing. We must become to see the justice too long delayed is justice denied. People cannot afford to wait. And this is the Achilles heel of the police state. A royal rupture of the prison's complex control over life. Esparza 15. Currently, more than 90% of cases never appear by a jury. The government has intentionally designed the system guaranteed the jury trial system is not used. Imagine the number of people demanding trial rights doubled or tripled in currents would be absolute chaos. This would be bullet train mass incarceration, number one priority. They would only be left with the option to throw out cases. For example, drug possession, victimless crimes. The solutions to drug war can be commenced through this powerful tool. And nullification is integral stopping the drug war. It focuses government reform and opens debate to bring disposability out of invisibility. Newman 11 brackets. Nullification protests unjust laws. Nullification was credited to the enduring our country's disaster with alcohol prohibition. We need to do the same with marijuana. There's growing recognition today that drug laws are unfair. The recent Gallup poll found that 50% of Americans want to legalize top of the words as vicious ever. There are more than 750,000 arrests last year alone. People should not expect change to come from Washington. There's definitely sounds when it comes to alternatives. Democratic Republicans do own one. They give up their tough and crime credentials. It is up to our peers. Enough is enough. The HBO series, The Wire, calls for nullification as a strategy. Doesn't resolve the myriad complexities. All it does is open up paradoxical issues. But this is what we can do, and this is what we will do. No longer will we tinker with the machinery of the drug war. We have more power than we realize if people lead the police fall. And our demand is not in here. Nullification is part of a larger tactic towards challenging the state's ability to destroy lives. Spillovers empirically verified. Martyr 02. 3 examples in which drug sentences and law schemes have produced a pattern of jury acquittals or hung juries. 3 strikes and responses suggest that the government branches have responded to acquittals. A pattern of acquittals is an important indicator of disjunction between laws and the community view, and the other branches have interrupted. And nullification is important. Guerrilla tactic activates individual agency, overthrow militarization. Whitehead 15. It's hard to empower. I feel empowered when citizens can make a difference. It's hard to persuade anyone to stand against tyranny when no one can promise persecution. When the government always wins, you can see employment to their challenge, and it's far easier to buy into the political process. Those who subscribe to the notion that revolution is the only thing that makes themselves easy targets. So you start by changing the rules and engage in some guerrilla tactics. Take part of grassroots activism while you're at it. Nullify everything that is illegitimate, and use particularity framing when discussing action, politics. Cratchwell 2008. A pragmatic approach does not begin with ontology, the method with acting as beings are placed in specific situations. We have to act under time pressures and facing complete information. This puts a premium on the diagnostic shortcuts. We cannot rely on what is generally true, but have to pay specific attention to the particulars that still remains a crucial element of timing. And the AF specifically activates agency. Hangzhou Hangho 8. Debate games require a balanced gaming and teaching dialogical philosophy offers an explanation why debate games may be valuable. The outside perspective refers to a fundamental aspect of human understanding and the interaction of individuals reach understanding, find their own voice. The ontological process of ideological play debate scenarios support students in becoming not only themselves but also in becoming articulate and responsive. In discourse where mentality shifts fails. Schwartz 9. Individuals cannot discursively perform themselves outside their socioeconomic position. We can't perform ourselves once way out of an underfunded industrial city, out of being laid off with auto work with dim prospects of finding a new job. Traditional theories of structuralization provide greater insight into how these individuals will deal with these stressful dilemmas and do micro-level theories. Emphasis on discourse overtly devalues the state as arena for political form. Rights do not fix identities. How does her fear of bureaucratic power speak to the experience of hundreds of thousands? Cut the card there.
Did you read Ferguson 11?
No, and there's also a card in the Solvency that I did not read.
Okay, can you just...
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, Ferguson 11.
I already deleted Ferguson.
Okay. And then it's just... Here, can you? Because your mouse is
sure.
Parmenter. I read the tag, but not the card.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's start off with the Curry 14 evidence.
Sure.
Why do we need to look at the material?
So Curry, I think, makes quite a few different arguments there.
Sure.
The first argument he says is that any sort of ideal theory, or not looking particularly to the material implications that affect people's lives, has to abstract from that representation, which means there's always something that is being lost, which is why you can make sweeping claims about alt solves the case, or sweeping claims about alt turns the case, or whatever that we all know is false in the actual world.
What is
you get to make these random debate arguments that are abstract.
So your Reynolds 13 evidence says that anyone can be labeled a criminal.
There are so many criminal, offenses now within the status quo that almost anybody can be labeled a criminal. The function of this argument is to say that even if people are innocent and they're minorities, and since they're targeted by prosecutors, prosecutors can use a bunch of other things that they were not intending for the original conviction to force them into a plea bargain to say, oh, if we can't prove this, we can prove this, we can prove this, we can prove this. Proves that prosecutors have too much power within the status quo, and jury nullification is an important check to that.
So how does jury nullification check back?
So jury nullification does two things. First thing it does is it doesn't incentivize plea bargains because it indicates that nullification is there as a safety haven, which means people are willing to go into trial. The second argument that it does is it checks back against these stupid convictions. If we nullified, we would have nullified prosecuting somebody for activism, prostitution.
What's the point of the 10 and 15 evidence? You specify queer activists?
The AF is not a plan. It's just explaining how the AF impacts a variety of different people. Okay. This was an example and a manifestation of the ridiculous criminal laws that we have. Tynan 15 explains that a black transgender activist was prosecuted for prostitution for activism.
I got it. So explain the Esparza 15 evidence.
The Esparza 15 evidence says that one of the ways that we solve is by creating this sort of demand within these communities, and thus we decrease the amount of plea bargains.
So we create this demand within the communities, and that solves.
You didn't let me finish.
Yeah, sure. Keep going.
Yeah, so like I said, there's this sort of symbol that's created within the community, and what happens is that leads to more people demanding their trial rights, which is what Esparza says is currently denied, because people think nullification is a tactic. For instance, in the Bronx juries, California, and New York.
Okay, so it creates the symbol within the communities.
It's just saying that if jury nullification were a thing, right? If we had jury nullification in the criminal justice system, there would be less plea bargains, there would be more ways to check against the state. The state would have to throw out these stupid laws.
Okay, that's fine.
It's pretty straightforward.
Let's see. Okay, what about the martyr O2 evidence? The nullification is part of a... So what offense are you trying to claim here with the martyr O2?
It's just empirical for spillover. The AF solves a larger problem than just
Okay.
direct arguments. But I do have reasons why those direct lives that we
What is-
save aren't
what is
impacted enough.
agency?
What do you mean? What is agency?
What, like,
I think it's pretty
define
clear. I mean, my argument in context of the affirmative is that, like, the ability to participate in politics. I think the Payne evidence is very good at describing kind of what that looks like when people don't feel like their individual agency has an impact
Okay.
because of the status quo criminalization. They don't engage in political reform. So that the AF is basically gateway to all the other things.
Okay. That's fine. Alright.
Three and four.
Oh, and then the agency in the Hong Hodge.
4 minutes.
Yep.
Yeah. Has Glenbrooks never been 5? I always remember taking 5. Whatever.
Okay. So, I mean, I have this one card on my computer, but the rest is on paper.
Can you just flash me?
Yeah, I can flash it if that's fine.
If you have it all on computer, that'd be preferable.
Oh.
Because I'm sure you have a computer version. I mean, you don't have to, but like that would just be easier on all of us.
I don't have the thing is, I just don't have it in this order.
All right, that's fine. I'll just.
I don't. Yeah. I'll hand it to you as I'm reading it, and then.
Okay, sure.
Yeah.
Can I get the card then?
Yeah. So the. Okay.
How many sheets do I need?
It's just, the order's just one off, basically.
Awesome. Yeah. Your water. Sit yours.
Called a card. Where did I put this?
Doesn't matter.
That's fine. ready? Oh, this is mine? No, no.
No, I'm not ready. Yeah, I mean, that's basically
What?
it.
Whose is that?
I have no idea.
Bob, is that
I
yours?
think that's libertarian. What, that water?
Yeah. All yours?
No.
Oh, it's mine. Mine, yeah.
Okay.
I'm just gonna take it. Here, can you give it to me?
What did you say the order was?
One off AC.
Okay. I guess you have 144.
Yep.
Go ahead.
We wear the mask. We wear the mask that grins and lies, it hides our cheeks and shades our eyes. This debt we pay to human guile, with torn and bleeding hearts we smile, and mouth with myriad subtleties. Why should the world be overwise in counting all our tears and sighs? They let them only see us while we wear the mask. We smile, but oh great Christ, our cries to thee from tortured souls arise. We sing, but oh the clay is vile beneath our feet and long the mile. But let the world dream otherwise, we wear the mask. Dunbar. The law is the instantiation of slavery, the call for legal relief, the call for recognition of not guilty and equals the perfection of the modern slave apparatus, the mark of slavery, the search for the flesh, the world follows the mark. Farley. Whatever black is slavery and segregation, you segregation, story progress from slavery is a lie, the longest lie, story progress from slavery is true, juridically in the form of the rule of law, slavery is the rule of law, and slavery is death, the slave bowed down before its master when it prays for legal relief, when it prays for equal rights, moral cultivates a field of law, hoping for an answer to forcefully guides the condition when equals are centered to the commons of reasons of the kingdom of ethics, universalizable principles, equality and freedom, the request to produce through an injury, the initial injury is the marking bodies for less respect, less land, less freedom, less education, less, the market is made on the flesh, because that's where we start from, the market's race, the market's gender, the market's class, the market is. Next. The ghetto is prison, our schools are prisons, our minds are prisons, distinguishing between the complexes created contain us, the streets we walk freely on, guilt over the only reality for blackness. The black was born in America's Alcatraz, Sexton. What both the fact of blacks and the lived experience of black name for us in this, their described merchants in the anti-black world for which there's no outside, there's no such thing as a future slave. If you go to jail, so what? If you're black, you were born in jail. If you were black, you were born in jail. For blacks, you waste the political borders of the nation, they mark the walls of social incarceration, political ontology, of race and tribe biotic differences of region, legal standing. Malcolm X does not restrict his comment to the USA's evolving analysis accommodated a much larger geographical scope. What else he elsewhere designated white world supremacy, not only the figure of nothing to lose, but your chains of the proletariat, but the literal inability to lose because able to accumulate, to have, to hold, to self-possess it all. The whites extend the interlocutory life of the world, sitting on juries and cooperating with legal procedures, putting a smiley face on participation in the legal system. Wilderson. There's something organic to black positionality that makes essential destruction of civil society. There's something organic to civil society that makes essential destruction of the black body. Black's positionality of absolute dereliction, abandonment. Blacks cannot be going with civil society's main junior partners. Black citizenship or black civic obligation or oxymorons, coalition, social movements, and radical social movements like the prison abolition movement, bound up in the solicitation of a gemi, so to fortify and extend the interlocutory life of civil society, ultimately accommodate all the insatiable demands and finite antagonists of civil society's junior partners before close upon the insatiable demands and endless antagonists of the prison slave in waiting, whereas such coalitions, social movements cannot be called the outright handmaids of white supremacy. Their rhetorical structures, political desire underwritten by supplemental anti-blackness. The state engages in the process of political retooling of structures caused to remain complicit in anti-black violence. The Koreans of humanity relies upon the opposing Koreans of blackness. The lived experience of black people support this, but still begs the wrong question. Domination is structural inherent. Wilderson 2. Some ask after claims for man in the state, but civil rights movement insists on positive and operational analytics for political theory that appears to be a dichotomous and essential strength of masters and slaves. One could answer by demonstrating nothing remotely approaching claims for man in the state come to pass. The election of black party, police brutality, mass incarceration, segregated segregated schools, and astronomical rates of HIV, fiction, threat of being turned away, and massive postal constant lived experience of black life, and like such a downward spiral into sociology, political science, history, and public policy, with the very rubric that I'm calling to question. The ground of suffering known as exploitation and alienation, the assumptive logic of subjective dispossession is rather than the calculation between those who sell labor power and those who acquire. And once the solid plank of workers removes slavery, the proposition state and civil society Alaska have even contemplated the possibility of a mandatory project for the black position disintegrates with thin air. No slave, no world. Next. There is an unconscious liberal desire for black death. Wilderson 3. No other body function the imagined, the symbolic, or the real, so complete is repository of complete disorders. The black body, black is the side of absolute dereliction, the level of real for its magnetizing both the black body functions the map of gratuitous violence over society is possible. Black is the side of absolute dereliction, the level symbolic for blackness, American generates no categories for chromosomes in history, no data for the categories of immigration or sovereignty, experience without analog, a past without heritage. Black is the side of absolute dereliction, level of imagination versus rape, says black versus person, says black versus AIDS, says black, the Negroes, a phobic chicken object. It means all those things. A phobic chicken past without heritage, the map of gratuitous violence, and a program of complete disorder. Next. Society reduces blackness to the plane of ontological death, making fungible line for subjugation violence. The middle passage created blackness to ensure the metaphysics of black. The one he sees is structural adjustment, creating the roots of knowledge by attempting to present blackness in the realm of the human. Wilson 4. Whereas humans exist on some planet become existentially present with some struggle for through recognition of black cannot attain the plane of recognition. The violence of the position repetitively reproduces the black is what historic moves not analog and suffering dynamics of the ontologically alive. The thoughts about analog does not simply oppress the black to tactile empirical technology suppression. Rather, the middle passage wiped out metaphysics, their customs and source on which they are based. But assures the possibility of ontology because the black with an infinite and eternally horrifying open vulnerability. And object made fungible black has no ontological resistance in the eyes of the white man. How is the black appears to partner with the senior junior partner of society when the black is not in the world? Black analyzing the roots of analogy, backing that the black is present, coherent, and immune human. Such an adjustment is not unlike the structural adjustment of determination, but adhered to for the world is securing alone, signing on the dotted line means failing ontological capacity, regardless of the fact that blackness is incapacitates with pure and unadulterated form. The alternative is to recognize the unethical network of society and reorient ourselves towards the end of the world. It must all go. Wilderson 5. The woman at Columbia was not demanding to be a participant in an unethical network of distribution. She was not demanding a place within capital peace supply. She gave birth to the commodity into the human, and she had neither subjectivity nor self control for her, and the world, and that's a merely discriminatory practice, but the world itself was unethical, and the world passed by without the science explanation, stop and disabuse of her claim. Instead, it calls it crazy. What do we make of a world that responds to the most loose enunciation of ethics with violence, return to our land to the savage, repair to the modern subjectivity of the slave, 2 simple sentences, 13 simple words, and the structure of use perhaps global intelligence would be mental when pared down to 13 words and 2 sentences. What kind of wonder questions to go to the heart of the ethical political questions of political ontology are so unspeakable, clearly they can be spoken, so ubiquitously unspoken, that these 2 simple sentences, these 13 words, not only render their speaker crazy, but themselves impossible magic. Consequently, the power of black to pose the question, the power of the question of powerful retreats is why radical progressive retire from the struggle. The role of the ballast of abandoning humanity, Hartman 97. The discourse of humanism was double-edged. Since the life and liberty they held in esteem were racial entitlements formally denied them. The recognition of humanity held out the promise not of liberating the flesh or of redeeming one's suffering, but rather of intensifying. Its acknowledgement was little more than a pretext for punishment, dissimulation of the violence of child slavery, and the sanction given by law and state, instantiation of racial hierarchy, the presumed endowments of man, conscious sentiment, and reason, rather than assuring liberty or negating slavery acts as yoke slavery, freeing the heart, the soul, and the mind was simply the inroads of discipline rather than that which confirmed the climate of slavery. Next. Your movement towards increasing agency and choice anti-black, black's incapacity and capacity is prior to agency. Wilderson 6. I was shown dependent on the explanatory power of white views on the kindness of the subject as universal entity who exists operating within the community of contemporaries. It does not reside on what's fully constituted. Brown up with the notion of prior existing contemporaries. The assumption of relationality itself is not a question, which is always the question for the slave. What's the question? Instead is the status of the prior existing relations, the relationship by empty speech, the monumentalization of the ego, the full speech encounter between beings who live either under the neurotic joke of the ego or the liberty and deconstructive relations to the ego, to the presence of an extra minute. Due to the presence of the prior existing relation to the world of contemporaries, the fear of world fears at stake when what fears many ontologically with the cultural objects to fulfill a set of intellectual protocols and find as they do their black lives capacity everywhere. More accurately said, not that they find capacity everywhere since they do not look everywhere, but they find it where they are among their contemporaries and assume its ubiquity. White academics follow black death as modernist condition possible because their ability to imagine the productive subjectivity is an effective reading or substance for the unbearable terrors is not self-discovery already waiting for life from the fact that say brief and infrequent conjectures large-scale black violence 18th 19th century slave world 20th century the socialists provide no catalyst for what of all this interferes the unbearable hydraulics of black development Swedes life of white spells best capital the short expression social stability for against the guarantees stability of society. They cannot break into the mutually exclusive genial elements of the positions of in men garden consolable at least not with such a force to rupture positional exclusivity and bring about the end of the prison world liberal economy of modernity is cartography the western hemisphere of the United States society's contract achieves a structure unconscious exchange by way of ontology in which blacks overturns the embodiment of impossibility incoherence incapacity choose analysis of the Negro's modernity necessity that which kickstarts sustains production in western hemisphere we can begin to make the transition from the parasitic necessity of white and liberal economy.
Alright, I want you to put all these things in order. Mark off any cards you didn't read. This is like too messy for me to
Sure. I mean, I read everything on paper.
I understand, but like you just kept throwing pages. There's a lot of pages. It got confusing. It's out of order. I'm scared. So please order, please. Alright. Can we take this off?
Oh.
Or are you gonna stand?
I'll stand. Yeah.
Okay, sure. Whenever Bob's ready. Ready? Can you explain to me the meaning behind this poem? I'm not the best at poetry.
The meaning behind this poem is from the 1960s. It was about when black people were experiencing discrimination, or said black objects were experiencing discrimination at the time. They wore the mask, i.e., they did not articulate.
So, what does it mean to wear the mask in this debate round?
It doesn't. Well, it
how
means.
How do we wear the mask? How do we non-black individuals wear the mask?
What do you mean, we non-black individuals? The argument. This poem is in response to epistemology critiques. That's the purpose of this poem in the 1NC. When you talk about personal experience and lived experience in the 1NC, this is lived experience. This is individual lived experience.
Why is this one person's lived experience? This academic poet Dunbar. Why does
academic poet
or this poet
yes.
Dunbar? Why does he or she or however they identify represent the lived experience of all black people?
They don't. My argument.
Okay.
So my argument
cool.
is.
So let me ask you. Let me ask you a question, which is, does the thesis of the case still think that it is important for black lives to be protected?
Black lives to be protected? I think that's a wrong question, right? The protection of black lives is contingent upon the world. So if you want black lives to be protected, the world must go. The protection of black life.
let me ask you the
sure.
question, which is, what we seem to have two different conceptions of life. I'm talking about a material conception, namely, do you have food on the table? Are you in the prison industrial complex? Are you being abused by prison wardens?
Yes.
Do you have a job? Can
Yes.
you feed your
Sure.
children? Those are the lives I'm
Yes.
talking about.
Sure.
You seem to be talking about a different conception of life, namely one
think-
that is
yes.
metaphysical, ontological, whatever you want to call it.
You were talking about the
Does the physical form of life that I am talking about matter under the critique?
individual lived experience is not essential to a conception of ontology. That is the point of the one.
your ontology critique,
Yeah. Colin?
individual lived experience doesn't matter.
It is inessential. Yes, it is important, but it's not essential to the question of ontology. The political
So
ontology
why
of
is
the
the
world
why
at
is the
large.
question of ontology first? I don't understand that.
The question of because that is
If it can't impact anything about what people actually care about, what black people
what
actually, care about in their
My,
communities.
my whole argument is that it doesn't matter if the slave doesn't believe it's a slave. The slave is still a slave. The individual black tokenism that you
So-
talk about is problematic because that's the kind of thing that detracts us away from the broader structural analysis that recreates anti-black.
Okay, so I understand there's a structural analysis that's important. I think the affirmative engages in some of that structural
I
analysis.
don't think so.
But all right, we can have a debate about
Yes.
that. My question becomes, though, why is it that the structural analysis precedes any sort of consideration that we can have?
What do you mean any sort of consideration? My argument
It
is that
seems like
when-
you're saying
yes,
just because the AF has not started from reject the world, the AF loses.
that's that. Well, that just because yes, there are multiple links into criticism.
All right, what's the alternative? What do you do?
We reorient ourselves towards the end of the world.
How do you
burn it
reorient
down.
yourself? If anti-blackness is libidinal, how can we reorient ourselves?
Okay,
How's that
okay.
possible?
It's not like a cognitive. It's not like
So
a
what
mindset.
is it then?
It is literally we burn everything down. The
Fi-
alternative.
Wilderson says to physically take oil and gas, pour it everywhere, burn it
Hey,
down.
the mechanism is up to black people, right? Like we don't decide that. The alternative is the ethical
What if the
authorization
mechanism
for
that
to
black
happen.
people want to take is jury nullification?
Well,
That's
okay.
up to them?
No.
That's-
You operate within the confines of legality. My argument is that is problematic because that's the kind of black tokenism that replicates anti-blackness.
Status of the alt.
Unconditional.
Does the alt include the AF?
No.
Okay. What literature did Wilderson review in order to come to the conclusion that blackness is libidinal?
Lacan.
Lacan,
Mm-hmm.
the white psychoanalytic guy.
He reforms Lacanian
I'm asking you what
psychoanalysis.
literature did he review?
What do you mean, what literature? He reviewed Hortense Spiller's, Sadia Hartman, all of this black scholarship in coming to this conclusion. Jared Sexton, Fred Moten.
That's fine. That's fine.
Fanon. The original.
Where's your roll of the ballot card?
Hartman 97.
All right.
Probably after that.
Can you pull it up from the chair here? Only the highlights, right?
Yep.
All right, I have 10.
Here it is.
Can I get my taller one? Yes.
Okay.
Wait, what happened? This doesn't reach anymore.
Whoa.
Here, can you move
Yeah,
this? No, can you help me move this table?
Oh.
Or move this table closer so I can get the top stand actually stand. All right. It's in the same speech doc, but it's at the very top. All right, let me just reopen it on my computer. Okay. So order's going to be case.
Yep.
Then the roll of ballot.
Yep.
His roll of ballot.
Yep.
Then the critique.
What's it called?
It's same doc. Speech Glenbrooks round 6.
Roll the ballot. Do you want me to start on Hartman 97?
Yeah.
Okay.
You have it pulled up?
Yep.
All right.
Yep.
Is everybody ready? You have conceded 100% of the case, which is going to be damning for you to debate. You have conceded that criminalization is absurd as its attack that renders lives invisible, epitomized by the war on drug that feeds hundreds of thousands disproportionately colored people into British industrial competence. Modern racism nullification is an important tactic of resistance. One, it creates political symbols. Two, it overloads system force response. And three, it activates individual agency. Now, there are multiple concessions like case that are going to directly take out the K, and you should prefer the 1 AR weighing because it was in the 1AC. You have conceded, which means that it has stronger strength of link. This is how debate works. You cannot just extend the rule of ballot as a reason why you don't have to deal with the limelight. Otherwise, it's not become debate, and it is nonsensical. The first argument you have conceded is curry evidence indicates that you cannot totalize things into Afro-pessimism, and you have to consider the material. The curry evidence indicates that we do not start from action by considering things like anti-blackness. Black people do not act in context of the jury by thinking, oh, the world is ontological, which means my life has no meaning. Obviously, black people still think they have meaning in their lives and that it is a contingent material realities that shape whether or not they see values in their own life. The question is do we care about black lives in terms of the material sense? And if the answer is yes, and that means that if I win the case, and that means that there is reason to affirm. The second argument concedes of pain evidence indicates that people cannot engage in your alternative if they are trapped in a culture of science. That's also in the white hat evidence indicates that it is very hard to do your activism if you just get caught by the political militarization, which means journalification is necessary in order to fight for politicization and militarization in order to be able to access the oil in the first place. You say we should burn it down. If we want to burn it down, that means we have to be able to nullify the people who are convicted for burning it down, which means jury nullification is necessary. That's an evidence of interpretation. Now you've also conceded the particularity. The contrary evidence is that we cannot start from a question of ontology because we have time constraints, namely that people in black lives are dying now. That's the Collins evidence, which means that we cannot wait, and wait is just academic white privilege and theorizing, which is something that we do not have the luxury of, which means that affirmative implementation and policy is necessary. Now these are reasons why the affirmative has to come before the critique, which means it also takes out your role of ballot. Your humanity role of ballot is absolutely terrible. it just says that blackness is anti-logical and humanism just reintroduces anti-blackness, not make a claim about the judge. You've also conceded the Hangzhou evidence, which says that it is about political agency, not the same kind of agency that you read in your card. Yes, agency might be tainted, but my argument is about pragmatic agency, namely our ability to even be able to engage in questions of liberation in the first place, which is something that you cannot access because you have conceded too much case. Now, okay. First is that there are multiple reasons why I do not link it. First of all, is that we are not the law. We deny that the law is just and always think that it should be open to the community of juries. This is why the one AC says that we should use jury nullification as a way to get away from police state. The difference between this affirmative traditional liberation strategy is the affirmative say it is not saying that the law should help us. It's saying that the law should get the hell out of our lives, which means that it is not linked to the Farley evidence. Also does not link it to the Sexton evidence because it indicates that we do engage in structural analysis. Namely, that when we have rampant criminalization in the Reynolds evidence and the Tynan evidence, it allows us to prosecute black transgender activists, which means that we are allowed to discriminate against the ability for the alternative to happen. Now, permutation. You should do jury nullification as one tactic in order to challenge the anti-black world. Wilderson scholarship is not intended to preclude goal-oriented political change. Permutation survives. This is Wilderson himself. My writing is about radical change, but I've worked as an activist. My labor has been goal-oriented. I organized free political prisoners. I want to writing to resonate with my tangible, identifiable results. The relationship of literature to the struggle is not one of causality, but of accompaniment. I've been involved with political movements, but none have called for an end role. Indicates that permutation is definitely possible. Now, the alternative fails. There is nothing behind the alternative. You say that the alternative is just a question of what black people want, and that's what it means to burn it down, which means that black people want jury nullification. That's the martyr evidence indicates that a lot of juries, for instance, in New York, California, as well as the Bronx juries, want jury nullification. Please that the alternative is the affirmative, which means the affirmative definitely outweighs. Now, your alternative does not do anything. Wilderson convenes himself. Wilderson 10. It is customary for a book to end like this to have prescription gestures. Vladimir Lenin's question, what is to be done? Not only have the such deeds been sown in the book, but I have argued that anti-blackness is the genome of horticulture template for human renewal. Given the structural balance it takes it to reproduce a slave, but concluding consideration of the Lenin's question would ring hollow. I know that's better than to offer even a hint of a roadmap to freedom so extensive that we free from epistemic error. We reach to say that we free air while admitting that we know nothing is sorts of best of what I've done here. It means that alternative cannot solve. That's Wilderson's own conclusion. It means that any risk at the affirmative matters, and that black lives matter is the reason why you prefer the material conditions. Material conditions still matter, even if ontology is poor. And furthermore, there's no articulation why ontology is the only thing that matters, which it doesn't matter. Now, structural adjustment is possible. That's the one EC evidence. You've conceded solvency. You've also conceded that things like abolition, things like voting rights, and things like women's rights issues are a proof that there is structural adjustment between the material lives can improve. I only your psychoanalysis theory is bad. Hudson. Where's the Hudson? Colonialism about the construction of white subjects and black subjects. Colonialism about contingent social relation. Neither white nor black has the value independent of a relationship. Cut the card as relationship.
144. Yep. Give me a second. Wait, did you read Warden?
No.
be.
She won't just defend anything. We have to ask specifically, which is obviously our paragraphs. What's the order?
NCAC.
So roll the ballot, flow at the bottom.
Starting off with Wilderson 3.
Hero Wilderson 3.
Yep.
I don't know. There it is.
Okay.
Sure.
Ready?
They've conceded the psychoanalytic level of the blackness is magnetized to both to the level of real blackness is assumed criminality on the level of imaginary blackness symbolizes death on the level symbolic. The implication is there's an unconscious liberal desire for blackness. There's no warrant in the Hudson and everything. Affirmative can never solve because affirmative operates with the confines of structures in civil society, and the only alternative is to recognize the unconscious liberal desire to move towards the end of the world. Let's go to line, extend the Wilson to the domination, structural inherently group all of his lived experience together. Yes, my argument is that lived experience is important, but it's not essential at the level of ontology because he tries to take up the structural adjustment analysis by talking about things like the voting rights, but this is the exact argument that Wilson making. Yes, whenever you talk about something like the voting rights, when you talk about civil rights movement, those things can always be overturned with more of the same. Yes, Jim McCall laws happened. After that came the rise of industrial competence, abolition did absolutely nothing. These are instances of structural adjustment where we just alter the confines by which we operate without substantive engagement in ontological analysis that depart from society, which means that's just something that detracts away. It's not linked to criticism because that's something that detracts away from the broader structures that we create anti-blackness, keeps confined with the system. Extend the first piece of what is that he operates with the confines of legality, extend the interlocutory life of the world by putting a smiling face on participation in the legal system. This is the problem. What he sees an example of the black tokenism where we say, we nullified one law, we nullified one particular case that replicates anti-blackness in the long run. For example, Obama has a bunch of white people shooting people in the Middle East, but no one on the left interrogates him because he brought Ahmed with his clock into the White House. This is the exact kind of logic that replicates kind of anti-blackness, replicates kind of anti-blackness. Instead of sex and evidence is a question of prison. The world is the prison for blacks. He makes the artificial distinction between you being criminalized outside of the prison and in the prison is problematic because the world is the prison for blacks. Blacks was born in America as Alcatraz. He says he engaged in structural analysis. That doesn't make any sense. And when he says not structural analysis, structural analysis is a question of political ontology and ethical political ontology, which when he sees not addressing, he said takes to the far levels because he's not the law, but yes, he is the law. Train nullification is constitutionally verified. He operates within the confines of legality and he operates within the confines of legality and replicates kind of anti-blackness environment. Let's go on to the permutation. There is no permutation. You should nullify as a critical tactic, but once again, he still operates within those same court system. My argument is that we literally need to end the world. The permutation is quite literally incoherent because he seeks to operate within those structures of society and maintain and sustain and breathe life into the veneer of the system as opposed to actively trying to end it with large. He says black jurors. He reads stuff and says black jurors. It's not a question of individual experience. It's not a question of what individually we desire or what individually black people desire, but it's a product of the broader coalition. Is a part of the broader process. Next, he reads a new piece of Wilson. Wilson, that's miscutting the Wilson analysis. And every time he reads this, Wilson, yes, at the bottom of the evidence, the non-underlined part of the tag says that yes, my writing, I've never advocated, my political strategy never advocated for the real and true world, but he says if he could get detached from his writing, that he would do something like that, which means that takes out the next on the Wilson 676 concedes that capacity comes prior to agency. He says he's talking about different kind of agencies. No, he's not. My argument is that the pragmatic agencies you're talking about is just a set of choices within a further limited set of choices, but blackness needs capacity in order to articulate its own subjectivity, which requires the end of the world where life is not responsive, which means all of his arguments in the way about moving towards empowerment, moving towards increasing voice in the system are problematic because don't give blackness capacity, only give it agency, which is a limited set of choices within choices, which is re-entrenched anti-blackness. It's the Harmon 97, it's the role of balance, abandoned humanity. Yes, I am interested in line with not a question of that. It's a question of the political. It's a question of political ontology. He can see that blackness is an ontological condition, which is problematic because the only possibility for engagement is the alternative. Only possibility for engagement is the alternative. Blackness is not shaped by historical. He tries to he articulates extension of the Curry evidence to the one he sees. So on the one he articulates extension of the Curry evidence, but cannot essentialize. But the Wilson 2 evidence directly responsive to this. Once again, the lived experience of black life is important, but it's not essential. One of these arguments is the one NC's argument is about the essence of blackness, not the existence of blackness. Yes, my argument is that the squad. Look at the squad. Look at black experiences. So it's characterized by mass mass incarceration, HIV, and all these other things. My argument is that insofar as we can make a production of the essence of blackness, that essence is deathliness, thingliness, objectless, which requires it's not a question of individual lived experience, it's a question of political ontology, of how that characterizes the broader structure of society, which means that takes out that argument, then he articulates a bunch of extensions when he says these are all responsive on the anti-flow. He articulates this culture of silence. Yes, all you talk about is empowerment. The important distinction you make, he says we need to empower them, he says we need to give them a voice in the current system. I'm saying we should destroy the current system. That system is fundamentally always will be opposed and always will be opposed to anti-blackness. That system will always be opposed to anti-blackness, which means it takes out that level of criticism. Next. Next, go back to the alternative flow. He now reads a piece of evidence, the other piece of Wilson evidence that he reads that talks about how Wilson says the alternative can't solve. That's nonsensical. What Wilson saying is we need to make a demand with incoherency. Yes, he says that we don't know, we right now don't have a kind of political process by which we can engage, which means just double turns the affirmative. He says Wilson does indicate that there's no conceptual political solvency in the context of what he says. Yet he still articulates that we need that kind of freedom. He says we do need that kind of subjectivity, which means that the alternative is the only way to kind of resolve that kind of violence. We need to reprogram, we need to reorient ourselves toward the everything must go. It's not a question of how you do it, but it's a question of the demand itself that must be articulated, which is what the call of the one he's making is non-responsive. So, overview. The multiple piece of link analysis means that he operates within the confines of legality. All disats to permutation, which means he's got access to any of those arguments. The Wilson 2 evidence indicates, yes, personal experience and lived experience is important, but it's not essential. You can cross about that lived experience with the Obama example. It's a question of political ontology, which always comes first, because that detracts us away from broad structures of Republican anti-blackness.
Ten. Take your papers off the thing. Yep. All right. Where's going to be case and critique? Okay, case, and then critique in the order of so the lived experiences argument, that's like all over the flow, so I don't really know how you want to flow that. I'm just going to kind of group and talk. It'll make sense.
Case K.
Yeah, case K.
There's a role of valid flow in there.
Yeah, that's going to be right after case.
Okay.
I kind of flowed down case because my arguments interact.
Sure.
All right. Is everybody ready? The alternative is impossible, and the affirmative is the only chance the alternative can happen. The permutation is try or die, which means that you clearly vote affirmative. Now, on the affirmative case, you have conceded that crass criminalization has become absurd, and that it's a tactic to render lives invisible, and black lives get fed into the prison industrial complex. You've also conceded that this means that the material condition is bad, and you have conceded that it is impossible for us to change and cause decriminalization. That's one that creates a political system, two, overlays system enforced response, and three, it activates individual agency. Now, here are two solvency deficits to the alternative that explains that the alternative cannot happen absent the alternative. Now, here's the articulation of the alternative in cross-examination. It is that we should burn things down, and how do we burn things down? Based on what black people want. That is the articulation. Do not let the new tuner say something about the alternative is about embracing subjectivity, because that was not in the 1 and C, nor was it in cross-examination. Do not do that work for him. Do not do any work for him if you are anywhere skeptical. Yes, you might understand Wilderson, but you do not understand the 2R means that you cannot vote for it now. There are a few arguments. First argument is the pragmatism of Honjo evidence. It indicates that we don't have political agency or pragmatic agency. It means that we just think that the world is impossible to operate in, which means that we cannot even question or have questions of pragmatic agency. When you do say this, all this ontology, say the average person cannot engage in your liberation strategy because A, they do not understand it, B, it just concludes pessimism, which is impossible, which means that the affirmative case is something necessary. You've also considered the Whitehead and Payne evidence. It indicates that you create a culture of silence, which means that these black bodies will not even engage in that in the first place. You obviously cannot ask the white bodies to engage in it for you, which means that you need the powerless people to engage in the alternative, which does not happen absent the affirmative. You also conceded that the Whitehead evidence indicates that people will get prosecuted, which means people advocating for the alternative or people doing the alternative and burning things down or doing whatever the hell they want to do will get prosecuted, which means there are notifications necessary in order for those people to be able to have it. That's the Whitehead evidence is conceded, which means that these are all 1A arguments. I do not care if you think that ontology is a framing question. You have conceded the alternative is impossible to happen, which means that try to for the affirmative because only permutation has a chance of doing that. Now that means case debate itself. Now on the K debate, now on the role of about all of these arguments that I just extended out the case prove that your role of about is bad. You've conceded the Curry evidence that take this out indicates that materiality does matter. You say that anti-blackness is an ontological question, but you have not answered two things. The first question is why do we care about this ontological question? You say that we don't because it leads to things like us misconceptualizing things in relation to Obama or things that other things in the future. But you have conceded the case solvency, which means the case solvency is clearly possible of changing a lot of material lives. You also framed the ontology arguments as being important because it is important in order to be able to access solvency to future material lives, which means that clearly materiality matters. Which means if I win the materialism debate, and that the permutation can still include the mindset of being skeptical of our position. That means that clearly the permutation solves the link, which means that the affirmative is never. You also have conceded that we care about black lives. If you do not care about black lives, then that means that you're just waiting and that it's just academic theorizing. And black people do not think about ontological in their status. They think about whether or not they can put food on the table, whether or not they will be in the prison-industrial complex, which means that clearly it matters. You say that lived experiences matter. That's exactly what the Kierkegaard in Dice. There's not enough line-by-line or direct application to Kierkegaard. Don't do that work for him, even if it's somewhere on the flow. Now, the next argument is the perm debate. Now, here's the problem. You just say that Millerstone evidence is miscut, but it's very clear that Wilderson himself is engaged in these sort of activism. Yes, he thinks that it's impossible for this necessarily to result in anything, but he at least proves that this is not necessarily going to link to the critique, and it does not make it alternative possible. It also proves that permutation is possible. Also, articulation cross-examination says that the permutation looks, or the alternative looks like whatever black people want. The Martyr evidence indicates that that's during nullification, which that's the way the challenge state. Now, on the link debate, you have conceded that the alternative fails because this Wilderson book does not even try to say it because it's libidinal, which means that no statement or burning down can ever change that, which means that the alternative fails tried it for the affirmative, and there's no link because we say the state get the hell out of our lives, not that the state should come help us, which is not structural adjustment in the way you conceive of it.
Can I see that Wilderson 2 card?
Do you have a...
about the aff is key to doing the alternative argument. I can see myself voting neg if the 2 and R does a lot better job with alternative framing. So I end up thinking that the neg is way ahead on this ontology debate. Oh, do you want this? Go ahead. I end up thinking that the neg wins the ontology debate fairly handily, which in a Wilderson debate usually means that the neg is going to win. But I think there's a distinction between simply winning that anti-blackness is ontological and winning a kind of evaluative structure for the judge that I should only care about ontology, or that this means, this means that there's some connection between it and the alternative that doesn't get made in this 2 and R. In particular, I think the neg is winning the argument that the psychoanalysis argument. The 2AR doesn't extend Hudson, which I thought was a huge mistake. Second, the historical analysis that anti-blackness just shifts into different forms, and that kind of minor level reforms or even major reforms like the abolition of slavery don't do anything. Third, the Sexton extension that says there's just an artificial distinction between slave and waiting, the world is a prison, this whole argument. And I thought there was a fourth one, but maybe that was it. Yeah, I think that the AF does not really have a good argument for why anti-blackness is not ontological, and I think that's really problematic when you're going for this kind of material effects framing, because the thrust of the ontology arguments is to say that there is no impact to any of these material effects. That, yeah, maybe on like the micro level it might seem like we have agency, but it's constrained. You expand choices within an already limited set of choices. That doesn't get us anything. So I think the ontology debate needs to be won by the affirmative for the most part, unless there is something like what happens in this debate, which is there's very little, close to zero alternative work done in the 2 and R, and that is kind of commonplace when going for a Wilderson argument, because as is read into this debate, Wilderson's like, I don't have a roadmap to freedom, like, we don't know what it would look like to end civil society, which is fine, and you can defend that line, but you still have to have a response to the argument that the AF is key to doing the alternative. So I end up thinking that jury nullification is important to give blacks whatever power it is that they will use to do the alternative. I don't know what the alternative looks like, but the AF has made a general claim that jury nullification is kind of the first step to give these people whatever very limited and not ontological agency they need to do the alternative. I would need a distinction from the negative on why the alternative can be done in a world where blacks have no political agency, in a world where blacks are ontologically dead, things, et cetera, but the AF cannot be done, right? So this argument I have dropped in the 2 and R, so I don't have a distinction like that, and I really just don't have a response. So I end up thinking that the AF does not produce any good material effects, but that if the alternative is good, which would be the only source of negative offense in this debate, that the affirmative is a first step to the alternative. I don't think the AF needs to win perm necessarily to get at that. It's just that it's a precondition. It's a kind of sequencing question. There's another way the neg can win without responding to this argument, which is to win a true case turn. And I don't think we have anything like that in this debate, or like some kind of you make it worse, that outweighs argument. The link level analysis is very shallow. You're like, they were within the legal system, jury nullification is constitutionally legit. You replicate anti-blackness. You operate within the court system, but it's incoherent to operate within civil society. That breathes life into the system. That's just not enough. You've got to win you have to prove to me that jury nullification actually makes life worse for black people, or makes us farther away from doing ontological analysis for some reason. And I understand why the AF is not ontological analysis, why they don't meet that framing, but why do they make it worse? Why is the AF put us farther away from doing what the alternative asks us? And I don't have that in this debate. Those are my main comments. I thought this debate would have been a lot quicker had the AF just extended Hudson. I don't have an explicit response in the 2 and R to that card at all, and so I would have had to do work for the neg to vote neg on the ontology argument had that been extended. I thought that was really the easiest way out.
Oh, okay.
I think the AF has a lot of the right pieces in the 1AR. That was good. You probably need to read this Hudson card earlier so you can actually.
Yeah, I
finish
read
the
like
card.
a line and a half, so I was like, I'm
So
probably
maybe
not going
yeah,
for this.
Yeah, but you can kind of.
Yeah, that's fair.
You don't have to stake the debate on it, but you can be like, yo, Bob, like, B-tab, I read half of this card, you didn't respond to it.
Yeah, that's
It
fair.
said no ontology. And then really line by line his warrants. I don't think most of the time you're not going to win if you lose the ontology debate.
Okay.
Other stuff, I think, strategy-wise, I think the 1NC should answer the case debate. I think you should just read some case turns. And obviously you don't have to say like these impacts matter. You can go for your ontology framing, but you can do things like say my case turns prove that non-structural changes or nothing but the alternative can destroy anti-blackness. There will only be a further manifestation of anti-blackness proven by the case arguments, and that's the second thing I asked for. If we don't get that alt framing, win a case turn, and it's much easier to vote on the alternative. So I'm not sure you need every card you read in the 1NC. I didn't end up calling, but there are like 6 Wilderson cards. I don't know. You probably need, I think you can make this argument very coherently with like 5 cards, not 10. And I don't think there's any huge loss, especially in this debate, because really you extend Wilderson 2, you extend Sexton, you talk about Hartman a little bit. But it's like, if you're not going to use all the tools you set up in the 1NC, what's the point? For the 1IR, I thought the use of the AF was good. I think there's still not a great reason to go for the perm. I think you need more offense on the K. You really don't have much. All of your stuff is very top level, like not ontological, Wilderson likes goal-oriented politics, perm, no link. None of that stuff is really offense. You should make arguments like their ontology framing is bad for black people. It is, patronizing. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. Heck, read a black-white binary card. Read something to get you offense against the K. In the 1AR, at least as an option for the 2ARs.
Okay, that makes sense.
Do y'all have any other questions?
Yeah, I just have 2 questions.
Yep.
The first one is, so how do you evaluate, I guess, the articulation of the alt debate? Because one argument I go for is that the AF is the alt because he says in CX that burning down the system or breaking it down is doing what black people want to break down the system. The AF has evidence that says that that's jury nullification, or at least makes the claim. And then in the 2 and R, he like shifts it and says like subjectivity, something. As a judge, like where?
Yeah, I mean, the extent of this argument in the 1AR is just the alt fails. California went jury nullification, so the alt is the F. I think it's kind of, I mean, when you see it like that, I don't think it's a really great argument because I don't think the alt is just do what black people want. I think the alternative says specifically we should orient ourselves toward ending civil society, but the question of the means of how we do that is do what black people want. Does the martyr card say that black people use jury nullification to end civil society?
Okay.
Probably not. So, like, yes, just because a black person wants something does not mean that it qualifies as doing what the alternative says.
Okay. And the next question is about this ontology thing. So I guess the argument I was trying to go for with the Curry evidence is just to say, even if you win blackness as ontological, if I win solvency, then
that sentence doesn't make any sense.
So
the impact of all the ontology arguments is that you cannot win solvency.
Why can't you win material solvency? I realize I can't win solvency for maybe the
he
ontological
said
condition.
The impact of every ontology argument is that there is no such thing as material solvency. You think that you have created some instance of agency over here, but anti-blackness is increasing over here. The net effect of any political action or reform is 0. I mean, that is the trick. That's the thesis of the argument.
Okay.
You're seeing this as like 2 different levels.
Yeah,
like,
that's how I see it.
Material effects that can go up or down, but the ontology is this higher layer. But the ontology informs whether or not the material effects can improve or not. Obviously, I mean, it would be a really bad argument if the neg were just like, blackness is ontological, but I'll concede that like things are getting better. I'll concede civil rights movement, a-okay, like in one sense. No,
So-
I mean it's bad in every sense.
Maybe this is just my misunderstanding of the literature, but how is that claim? How do you even like I guess resolve that claim where the neg says all the examples of the aft structural adjustment are just a zero-sum game, but there's no specific analysis on why it's a zero-sum game. I mean, maybe
Those
like there's a
arguments
top
you
level.
you concede
No,
that
not in this round. Not in this round.
But they make, you know, a kind of historical claim that like even the biggest seeming reforms have only shifted.
But weren't
variance of that
things still marginally better or like materially better, like from a material
you're-
standpoint?
Yeah.
Like
you can
it's
prove
hard
that.
for me to wrap my head around the idea that
I mean,
material solvency is informed by
It's
ontology.
a very, I don't know exactly how to describe it. Yes, you have to kind of get into this mind frame.
Okay, wait, can I also-
Obviously, Wilderson is going to deny that things are just a little better. I mean, that if you could prove that argument, that would answer the.
So
hey, I
what
agree.
specific argument then in the ontology arguments, like maybe in this case or in general, make that connection between ontology means everything is a zero-sum game and makes the analysis in?
Well, they would say the impact of any one of those arguments.
Like I just don't see a claim in the NC that says ontology means everything we do is a zero-sum game. Like if I, like, that sort of claim seems very
They're
preposterous
saying,
to me. I guess.
Yeah, a lot of people think that.
So like how does the NC like verify that? Or
is
how does the
pessimism,
NC?
I don't know.
Oh, okay.
How do they verify it? Like, no, they don't have a bunch of studies. So, like, yeah, your 1AR, you could read, like, a world getting better card, you know. Read
Okay, so
your
that's like,
your
is that the
evidence.
approach? Like, I don't understand how
If
you.
that's what you want to go for, then yeah.
So how would you falsify that ontological claim then?
I don't know, man. I'm not like a Willerson scholar.
Okay,
That-
okay.
Like, that's a good question for the 1NC cross-ex. How do you know that rate level of material violence against blacks always stays the same? How
Okay.
do you know that? What's the method? And you kind of get at that, and he's just like, oh, Wilderson looks at a lot of theorists.
Okay.
But you know, then make it a methodology debate about how do we know why is Wilderson's method a good one compared to like the empirical evidence. But you don't have empirical evidence either. So.
Yeah, no, I understand in context of this round. I'm just trying to understand it in general.
So,
Okay.
one last
And
one.
we can talk. We can talk more about. This is a very broad question that we can talk more about, but we should probably let this debate get started.
Oh, sorry.